On December 19, 1944, outside the village of Noville, German Panther crews reported something that seemed impossible. American tanks appeared everywhere, materializing out of the fog, firing a single shot into a Panther's flank, and disappearing before the turret could even begin to turn. Minutes later, the same attack came from a completely different direction. German intelligence informed divisional headquarters that they were facing a full American armored division at Noville, but they were wrong. In reality, the Americans had only a handful of tank destroyers, ton vehicles with paper-thin armor that could not survive a single hit, yet the Germans could not hit them. The M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II, was turning speed into a weapon, and on that frozen morning outside Bastogne, speed proved deadlier than armor. Germany had built the most feared tanks of the war, the Tiger and the Panther machines, capable of destroying Allied armor from over a mile away. Yet they carried a flaw German engineers never solved. Their turrets relied on the main engine for power. The Tiger Eye's hydraulic traverse, driven by the gearbox, could rotate fully in about 60 seconds at high RPM, but tanks did not fight at high RPM. They fought while stationary or crawling at idle, where a full rotation could take up to 4 minutes. If the hydraulics failed, crews were forced to hand-crank the turret 720 turns for a single rotation. On December 19, 1944, outside the village of Noville, German Panther crews reported something that seemed impossible. American tanks appeared everywhere, materializing out of the fog, firing a single shot into a Panther's flank, and disappearing before the turret could even begin to turn. Minutes later, the same attack came from a completely different direction. German intelligence informed divisional headquarters that they were facing a full American armored division at Noville, but they were wrong. In reality, the Americans had only a handful of tank destroyers, ton vehicles with paper-thin armor that could not survive a single hit, yet the Germans could not hit them. The M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked vehicle of World War II, was turning speed into a weapon, and on that frozen morning outside Bastogne, speed proved deadlier than armor. Germany had built the most feared tanks of the war, the Tiger and the Panther machines, capable of destroying Allied armor from over a mile away. Yet they carried a flaw German engineers never solved. Their turrets relied on the main engine for power. The Tiger Eye's hydraulic traverse, driven by the gearbox, could rotate fully in about 60 seconds at high RPM, but tanks did not fight at high RPM. They fought while stationary or crawling at idle, where a full rotation could take up to 4 minutes. If the hydraulics failed, crews were forced to hand-crank the turret 720 turns for a single rotation. The Panther improved on the Tiger's flaws, but not enough. At combat idle, turning just 90 degrees could take 15 to 20 seconds. It's a minor inconvenience that could be a death sentence against the right enemy. In 1941, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce took command of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center with one mission: figure out how to stop German panzers. Studying blitzkrieg tactics and every engagement where Allied armor had been outmatched, Bruce reached a conclusion that challenged everything the Army believed about armored warfare. Tank destroyers should be fast, not heavily armored punchers, not sluggers. His philosophy was brutally simple. German tanks had thick frontal armor and powerful guns, and meeting them head-on meant certain death. But their turrets were slow, their side armor thin, and a fast vehicle could flank a panzer, strike the side, destroy it, and vanish before the rest of the column could react. The Army thought Bruce was insane, but they built the vehicle anyway. And for the crews who would drive it, his theory was terrifyingly real. He was asking them to trade steel for speed, and bet their lives on moving faster than the enemy could shoot. In 1942, the Buick Motor Division received the contract and assigned Harley Earl's design studio, the same team that would later shape the finned Cadillacs of the 1950s. What they produced was unlike anything in the American arsenal. The M18 weighed just 18 tons, compared to a Panther at 45 and a Tiger at 57. The difference came from armor stripped almost to nothing 13 millimeters on the frontal hull, only 25 millimeters on the turret face. Standard infantry rifles couldn't penetrate it, but nearly everything else could. Crews were horrified. 13 millimeters was barely armor. Inside the hull, you were not protected, only hidden. Power came from a Wright R975 radial engine. The same engine used in the Sherman, now pushing a vehicle half the weight, giving it a top speed of 55 miles per hour, making the M18 the fastest tracked armored fighting vehicle of World War II, and earning it the name Hellcat. The math told the story. At 30 miles per hour, an M18 covered 44 feet per second, and in the 15 seconds, a Panther needed to traverse 90 degrees. A Hellcat could move over 600 feet, nearly 200 yards, enough to stay ahead of the gun barrel. German gunners faced an impossible choice: lead the target and hope it held course, or track it and watch shells land where it had been. Either way, they usually got one shot, because while the turret turned, Hellcat was already lining up a 76 millimeters round into the Panzer's side. The M18's turret was fast, but the real advantage was the entire vehicle could reposition faster than a German turret could turn. That was the math of survival, and at Bastogne, it would be tested. In December 1944, as the Wehrmacht hurled everything it had left into the Ardennes, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to the 101st. Airborne at Bastogne under Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton, when German armor from the 2nd Panzer Division threatened Nauville. North of Bastogne, the 705th was rushed forward to hold the line, joining Team Desabraya, mixed force of Sherman's Hellcats, and 101st Airborne paratroopers commanded by 26-year-old Major William Desabraya, were about to face an entire Panzer Division in fog so thick that engagements collapsed into point-blank ambushes at that range. The Hellcats' thin armor was a death sentence, but only if the Germans could hit them first. Inside the open-topped M18s, the tension was suffocating. No roof, only freezing rain, sniper fire, and the thunder of battle. With every shadow in the fog looking like a tiger, the 705th developed a technique that became legendary. A Hellcat would sprint to a street corner in Nauville, spot a Panther through the mist, fire a single shot into its flank, then slam into full reverse at maximum speed. By the time the Panther's turret traversed, the Hellcat was gone behind a building, down an alley, already repositioning. Moments later, the same vehicle would reappear from a different direction. Another shot, another kill, another disappearance. The Germans could not track them. Every time they turned to face one threat, another struck from somewhere else. Reports to 2nd Panzer Division headquarters grew increasingly desperate. They believed they were under attack by a full American armored division. In reality, they were facing a single reinforced battalion, a 26-year-old major, and a handful of tank destroyers moving faster than the German guns could turn. Speed did not save everyone. With only 13 millimeters of armor, any hit was usually fatal. German 75 millimeter rounds punched straight through the hull. Crews caught in the open died. Those who mistimed their moves died. And the unlucky faced a brutal truth the M18's open turret meant. Artillery airbursts and mortar fragments did not need a direct hit. Shrapnel rained straight into the fighting compartment. It was a fast ride, but if you stopped moving, it became a cold, open grave. Templeton drove his men hard because he knew the alternative was worse. Static defense meant death. Movement meant survival. On December 19th and 20th, Team Desabraya and the 705th destroyed more than 30 German tanks around Nauville. The village eventually fell. Their force was too small to hold against the full weight of the SD 2nd Panzer Division, but they bought critical hours for the 101st Airborne to establish the defensive perimeter that would hold Bastogne. Templeton survived the bulge and continued commanding the 705th into Germany. But on March 1st, 1945, an artillery shell struck his command post, and he never lived to see the victory his tactics helped secure. 4 months later, a different Hellcat battalion would prove the same math in a different theater. In Italy, the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the only unit fully equipped with M18s, was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Fowler. Its crews painted unauthorized black cat insignia on their turrets, a cartoon cat biting a tank on an orange disc. Headquarters ordered the markings removed, but they ignored the order. It was a small act of rebellion, but it mattered. They were driving the most fragile armored vehicles in the theater. And that black cat insignia was their way of declaring they were faster, smarter, and willing to survive where others would perish. February 1945. He had been
Iwo
waiting for this
Jima,
moment. Takahashi Toshiharu,
His unit had trained for
crouched in his
months to
concrete
destroy
bunker,
enemy armor.
watching
Studying
American
the weak
tanks
points of
advance
Sherman
through the
tank
volcanic
and
ash, practicing with lunge mines and satchel charges. The tank stopped 150 yards from his position, too far for a suicide charge, but close enough for the 47mm anti-tank gun in the next bunker. Then something happened that Takahashi had never seen before. Where the main gun should have fired a shell, a stream of liquid erupted from the barrel. Orange and black, moving like water through the air. The flame hit a neighboring bunker, and Takahashi heard screams. He wrote in his diary that night, "The enemy was burned out with a flamethrower. The flame is dark with black smoke. I could not see even an inch ahead." Takahashi survived, but most of his unit did not. What he witnessed was the debut of America's most terrifying weapon in the Pacific. A weapon that would prove more effective at clearing fortifications over the next 4 months than anything else deployed, and one the Japanese had no counter for. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had arrived on Iwo Jima in June 1944 with a single mission: make the Americans pay so dearly for the island that they would reconsider invading Japan itself. Kuribayashi was no ordinary commander. He had lived in America, studied American industrial capacity, and knew Japan could not match U.S. firepower in a conventional battle. He decided not to fight conventionally, studying every Japanese defeat in the Pacific Darawa Saipan. Pelaluhi noticed the same pattern. Commanders met the Americans at the water's edge, launched heroic banzai charges, and were slaughtered by naval guns and aircraft. Kuribayashi made a revolutionary choice. There would be no banzai charges, no open beach defenses, no glorious deaths. His men would fight underground. For 8 months, 5,000 Japanese soldiers spent nearly every waking hour digging, carving 11 miles of interconnected tunnels into volcanic rock. The original plan called for 17 miles, but American bombing interrupted construction. Still, what they completed was enough. Tunnels reaching 7 stories deep in some places. Chambers holding 300 men. Hospitals with operating rooms 75 feet underground. Command centers connected by miles of telephone wire. Above ground, 1,500 fortified positions dotted the island. Concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick. Steel doors that opened only to fire, then sealed shut. Each position had interlocking fields of fire. The genius was in the connections. When Americans cleared a bunker with grenades, Japanese soldiers would retreat through tunnels and reoccupy it from below. Positions that took hours to capture could be firing again in minutes. Kuribayashi had turned 8 square miles of volcanic rock into a fortress that defied conventional tactics. American intelligence estimated the island would fall in 5 days. Before the Marines landed, they delivered the heaviest bombardment of any Pacific island, 74 consecutive days of aerial bombing, 6,800 tons of explosives, followed by 22,000 shells from battleships and cruisers. The island disappeared under smoke and fire. Planners were confident nothing could survive such punishment. Yet the bombardment destroyed fewer than 200 of 1,500 fortified positions. The tunnel system was virtually untouched. Most Japanese soldiers had not been scratched and sat in their underground chambers, waiting. Kuribayashi had given explicit instructions. Let the Americans land. Let them advance. Let them think the bombardment worked hand, then open fire from every direction simultaneously. On February 19, 1945, 30,000 Marines hit the beaches. The first wave met almost no resistance. Some thought the bombardment had succeeded. The silence was a mask. For nearly an hour, thousands of Japanese gunners watched through firing slits, listening to Marines shout, but not one pulled a trigger. Then Kuribayashi gave the order. Hidden guns opened fire simultaneously. Artillery from Mount Suribachi. Machine guns from invisible bunkers. Mortar pre-registered on every yard of the beach. Black sand swallowed vehicles. Tanks could not climb the steep terraces. Marines had nowhere to hide. By nightfall, 2,400 Americans were dead or wounded, having advanced only 700 yards without reaching the main defensive line. What followed was weeks of cave-by bunker fighting, with Marines clearing positions only to be attacked from tunnels behind them. Man-portable flamethrowers helped, but operators had to get within 40 yards of a bunker, carrying 70 pounds of fuel while Japanese snipers targeted them. Casualties were high. By the third day, Marine commanders desperately needed a solution. That's when 8 modified Sherman tanks arrived from Hawaii. 5 months earlier, Colonel George Unmacked had assembled a team at Schofield Barracks to build a weapon capable of burning Japanese soldiers out of caves without killing Americans. Man-portable flamethrowers were effective, but deadly to their operators. The solution was obvious: mount flamethrowers on tanks. Previous designs had failed. Unmacked requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion mechanics, welders, electricians, and machinists who worked alongside the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company and the 5th Marine Tank Battalion. Using 8 M4A3 Shermans, they removed the 75mm gun and installed a flame projector, connected to 300 gallons of thickened napalm. Operating under high pressure for a range of 150 to 200 yards, each tank required 1,200 manners of modification, 1,100 electrical connections, and 150 custom parts. By January 1945, the 8 flame tanks were ready, outwardly identical to normal Shermans. Japanese defenders would not know they were flame tanks until the first shot. They arrived on Iwo Jima on the 3rd day of fighting. The first target was a concrete bunker that had pinned a Marine company for 6 hours. Artillery and grenades had failed. The Sherman rolled to within 150 yards, out of range of Japanese anti-tank weapons, and fired one burst of flame. For seconds, napalm flowed into the firing slit, consuming all the oxygen inside. Defenders died before they could scream. Word spread instantly. Flame tanks could do in seconds what infantry had tried for hours. Within days, every Marine commander requested flame tank support. Japanese soldiers had never seen anything like it. Concrete and steel that could withstand naval shells were powerless against liquid fire. Napalm clung to walls, found every crack, poured into tunnels and chambers, suffocating defenders. The psychological effect was devastating. Veterans later recalled the pressurized roar sounded like a jet engine starting up, drowning out rifle fire. Japanese soldiers would abandon positions the moment they heard the Sherman approaching. Colonel Fred Caldwell witnessed one desperate act. A Japanese officer charged a Sherman alone, sword raised, screaming. The flame projector engulfed him instantly. There was nothing else to do, no counter, no defense against a weapon that killed from 150 yards away. Takahashi Toshiharo's diary recounted a similar scene. 8 men ordered to charge an approaching Sherman with satchel charges were trapped. The tank stopped 90 meters away, too far to charge. Then the Marines collapsed the cave entrance. Takahashi survived by digging through rubble with his bayonet. The rest perished. British researchers later analyzed flamethrower effectiveness. Conventional weapons produced 1 enemy death per 270 gallons of fuel, but flamethrowers produced 1 surrender per 9 gallons, 30 times more effective psychologically than physically. Japanese soldiers who would fight to the death surrendered rather than face the flames. Anti-tank guns were ineffective at the flame tank's range. Suicide squads never reached their targets. Flame tanks exploited the gap in Japanese defensive doctrine. Operating beyond the reach of any weapon, while disguised as ordinary, Sherman's the 8 flame tanks at Iwo Jima proved the concept. Okinawa proved it could scale. The 713th Tank Battalion converted all 54 Shermans to flame tanks, landing in April 1945 to burn through the Shuri line, killing 4,788 Japanese, capturing 49, and losing only 8 Marines. Nearly 76,000 gallons of napalm were used. Some estimates over 200,000 gallons across all operations. Flame tank crews rarely spoke of their experiences. Some had nightmares for decades, dreaming of fires they had started. Kuribayashi had built a fortress to withstand conventional weapons, but flame tanks turned his tunnels into death traps. By the end of the Pacific Campaign, flame tanks had killed over 6,000 Japanese soldiers across Iwo Jima and Okinawa combined, often by incineration or suffocation, while drastically reducing American casualties in sectors where they operated. The flames died decades ago, but their impact on the Pacific War and the soldiers who faced them was unforgettable.